Okie dokie. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Esoteric Book Club, Meditations on the Tarot. Our conversation tonight is on the Sun card. Let's go into overall impressions of the chapter and then get into the nitty gritty. I enjoyed this chapter. I felt like, he's been consistent. Obviously, he's been consistent this whole book in his this is going to sound kind of mean, but how do you say the need to prove something based on the people that he really likes? So I feel like there was a lot of that in this chapter, of referencing people that I don't know the full backstory of, and I just kind of had some question marks on taking that as complete truth, like he was displaying it. I think it is truth for his perspective and how he practices. So I found a lot of value in that, and I was able to read through it really well and learned a lot about that. But there was a few things that I disagreed with, but overall I think the perspective of the sun meaning intuition and really solidifying in the hexagram, pentagram, and then going into mother father energy, I thought was really brilliant, and brought about in a concise way that will help me in my practice with understanding how to cultivate intuition in my life. I do feel like it was a very balanced perspective and very insightful in those ways. So we will talk about the disagreements as they come about. Cody, how was your impression of the chapter?
I found this chapter difficult in a lot of ways. I still am not sure a lot of what he means by a lot of stuff in it. I guess overall I feel like it comes together. The basic message is pretty clear. He says it straight up, at the beginning and into the chapter, what the card means. But a lot of how he gets there is it just seems a little bit too much to me or something. And he definitely is referencing stuff that I have, again, it's similar. I have little familiarity with, Aquinas and Kant even, and so. But then it's sometimes it's he's making some points that I kind of feel I don't know. I think there's better ways to get where he's going with intuition. I feel like there's simpler ways than his kind of over the top conceptualizations, but maybe we can get into that a little bit when we talk about it. So but yeah, overall I liked the stuff about the hexagram. I thought that was cool. The unifying of the father and mother energies in that way was really neat, and that's really interesting I feel like our perspective on Christianity in the US particularly is more skewed, or generally mine is more skewed towards the Protestant versions, which leaves out the mother aspect, and he talks about that. I think it's cool that his version of Catholicism really keeps that in, and that's really important. That kind of duality, and that's cool. His whole thing of bringing together opposites throughout the book, I really love, and I think he does more of that in this chapter. Even though he and that's what's sometimes it feels it's betraying his there's this hierarchy at the same time, and this emanation, or the Neoplatonic ideas of emanation, that like I feel like the unity is kind of betray that hierarchy. But at the same time, I think at points he's like saying, yeah, you can see this hierarchy, but you can also see the opposite of hierarchy, like how it all fits together in like a singular thing, like a unity, like the unity versus multiplicity. I don't know, these like, but anyway, I digress.
Cool. Britannia, how was your impression of this chapter?
I really loved this chapter, honestly. I don't know if I've dog-eared more pages in a chapter. I found this to be I mean, I think he was super concise in the beginning, and he didn't do his let me shoehorn this into the mold, which is like where I get the hang up, but I call it shoehorning, but for him it's not. But I think it's like his heavy-handed Jesus is the only way vibe that puts me off in the beginning of chapters. But this chapter went straight for like the marriage of intelligence and wisdom, and like the differences between the two, but how like the marriage of like intelligence leads to wisdom, which attracts the intuition. And I really liked I thought that was more of a balance, and especially like with the use of the mother and father as two different triangles to make the hexagon, or the hex, yeah, was like, I thought really really well put. I mean, I think a lot of his examples he uses because they are like kindred spirits to himself, but I think I do agree with Kant on a lot of the things that he did with the like metaphysics and like pushing the boundary and acknowledging that there is an intuition that's almost unexplainable because it's not yours, it's coming from outside of you. And the metaphor of us being the moon and being like the midnight moon or the midnight sun, coming to that intuition, was so beautiful. And like I know that feeling of like living through an eclipse and being under it and like feeling that feeling of more intuition than it is wisdom or intelligence. It's something beyond. And I think that it made it more complete with the way the chapter went like that. Yeah, I mean, I always have that hang up where it's like, oh, the woman is the moon and she, put herself down. That part I was like, I think that there's more like, I see what he's saying and it fits with like the religious archetype of what he's saying, but that part I was like, I don't think that there's a hierarchy in that sense, like what Cody said, where the unity kind of betrays the hierarchy. And like, I don't know. Yeah, so I think it went pretty well. I thought it was pretty intuitive. I liked it. I liked how he used like, the god names too, where he like brought it back to like the 4 letters again. But yeah, and I just like the whole concept of like the star being like the intuition, like the star of Hermeticism, and he keeps like revisiting that imagery. And for me, that's like, it's like, I don't know, like that light that people see when they're like near death experience or something. It's like describing that light in a way that's like tangible, like the star of Hermeticism in the sky of intuition was like one of my favorite lines from the chapter.
Mhm.
So I think I'll leave my explanation for how much I love this chapter on that note.
Nice. Good. Yeah, George, how was your impression of the chapter?
Yeah, it's good. It's very him, and what I mean by that specifically is it's intellectual to the max. He's extremely, when I read him, he reminds me of many of the Christian philosophers that are prominent in the Western tradition. It's like a constructive use, all the while using philosophical techniques that are that there's a tradition of philosophy in the West, but in especially in Christian philosophies, especially during the Middle Ages and maybe even the Dark Ages, there becomes, you get this real sense that there's this creativity. They ask some pretty esoteric questions, and they really use as a tool all that has come before in terms of philosophical techniques and body of knowledge to reach for the divine. And that really comes through in his writing. His style is extremely constructive. It's creative, right? It's like he's trying to merge things that are not supposed to go together, but because of his practice, because of his conviction, because of his long-term just meditating contemplating these subjects, he's really created this entire system of that's fairly self-consistent with not only Hermeticism but also his faith, right? His entire thought structure around Christianity and its practices and what they mean in terms and how that relates to Hermeticism and some of the deeper mystical truths coming out of that. So it's extremely if you can just get over the kind of his forms, you really get that feeling of his fervor towards the subject matter that he is talking about. He's really spent a great deal of time synthesizing and then this large sequential presentation of a subject matter, and that he has this is his life's work. You can very clearly tell that he's presenting it to you in a way that's true for him, and that all of his thinking, all of his thoughts, all his intuitions, all of his reaching is all about the synthesis. So I think I really enjoyed it. There were some pretty profound insights that he has reached. He presented them, of course, in very much the context of Protestantism, sometimes even Orthodoxy, where they cross over, and then he references older traditions such as Judaism, right? Ancient Judaism. And many of the insights that he has, however, because of the Hermetic influence, is extremely also includes other traditions, such as some of the traditions in philosophical traditions of India, right? He even references those because some of the Western philosophers also has references to those ideas, are influenced by those texts and ideas. So grand synthesis is it's extremely Western. And it's Western in a way that really shows itself in all of its all of the characteristics of Western thought, Western leanings and mysticism, Western leanings and philosophical, religious, practical thought as well as moral. Yeah, it's extremely extensive. There was some pretty profound stuff in this chapter.
Definitely agree. Awesome. Well, cool. Let's go line by, or not line by line, but
We'll be here for a while.
Read the whole thing. Let's go, topic by topic. I think he started off the chapter. Oh, I loved how he was talking about Gemini, because I'm a Gemini, with the, marriage of those kind of sides. But that's really what the principle of cooperation. And he brought that into, wisdom and intelligence, like started right off the bat with how cooperation between what the sun and the moon bring about the of those, those bodies being wisdom and intelligence, thus bringing in intuition.
I have an open question for around this particular subject, intuition, for the rest of you, because that immediately came up when he went into it in the beginning of this chapter, and that is, have your intuition ever led you wrong? If the definition here is the marriage of intelligence and wisdom, right? Yeah, how is that different than your definition of intuition? I guess is really the real question.
I think when it comes to other people's wills, it's been wrong for me. Like I have projected upon something or some situation a will that I wanted. And I was so sure that it would go that way, that when it didn't, because of other people's kind of factors in and their autonomy in that place, then that didn't come about. But so my intuition, I wouldn't say it was, not necessarily wrong, but the choice wasn't good for me to make, even though my intuition was saying it was. And again, I think that's also because I haven't had as refined as an intuition as I have now, but I still don't. So I think there's always like clearing up when it comes into like communication with between your, yeah, wisdom and intelligence, or between your sun and moon, or between your, you know, holy daemon, whatever you want to say of that intuition aspect. Like there's always room to buff that out. But in the past, that's where it steered me wrong probably the most.
I find that intuition, I like to think of it as like just day-to-day intuition, like our intuition on how to function, like how to pick up this class. You know, it's like is a marriage of wisdom and intelligence, right? Because it's like a marriage of like something innate, like innately wise about us that like can like conceptualize the class and picking it up and knowing our body and space and with like in our surroundings. And then like intelligence is in like experience, and that's like the marriage of wisdom and intelligence is like the experience of trial and error of like learning how to pick up a class, you know, like learning spatial dynamics. And it's like that's our I feel like that's our intelligence at work, like figuring out, like referencing our memories to figure out how things function. So like on a day-to-day level, our marriage of wisdom and intelligence is a brilliant thing, just keeping us alive. I think like you say that it's like that, and that this chapter is like challenges us to refine that in like you say, which is I think really cool, because there's moments when like there's like a mistrust of the intuition, like there's some stupid things we do that we know better, like even like when we like maybe like a ball is coming at us and we can't catch it, even though we always catch it, like because we're like distracted by a thought or something. So like the intuition of like how we can normally catch a ball, but otherwise like if we're like somewhere else, the ball hits us in the face, and that's like an act of stupidity, like a moment of the lack of the marriage of intelligence and wisdom. And then of course, like for how we live our lives long term and like in a thriving way and connection with each other and the planet, that's like that intuition is very damaged and could be brought back, in my opinion. So there's ways of like elevating intuition, I think, to the way that, and that's what I feel like he's getting at a lot. But I somewhat can't relate to it in the transcendental way that he kind of presents it. Like I have to bring it down to like the day to day, how intuition feels like it works for me. So yeah, I like intuition in the sense of like what I think is right sometimes isn't, and that's kind of stupidity. There's a certain ignorance that like is a lack of that marriage of wisdom and intelligence. So therefore, like my intuition has betrayed me. To answer Jordan's question.
I don't know if it's that. I don't think it's the lack of marriage. I think maybe sometimes when you're like, say you're trying to catch the ball, but you're distracted by thought, that's your intelligence overpowering your wisdom. So instead of it being balanced, it's not like there isn't that relationship there, but I think it's like as humans, we have to recalibrate like in each situation, the balance between wisdom and intelligence. And I think that sometimes when we want things to go our way or we want to control things, we try to be more intelligent than wise, because wisdom, I think, kind of implies that there's a bigger truth that may not go the way you want it to, and you have to accept it and kind of work with that. And that's where like the intuition comes in, is like, oh, I have a feeling, that this could go this way or it could go that way. But if I want it to go a certain way, then it's already like overcorrecting in like an intelligent way. And I think that's our way of like grappling for patterns and control. But like if you surrender to like that intuition, you'll know that there's a mandala. Like we always come back to the midpoint. So no matter how far you try to fight to get outside of the current of like that flow state, you'll always end up swirling back around to the midpoint. It just depends like what kind of like parabola you want to take, I guess. But I don't know. I think for like his like marriage of intelligence and intuition is more of a relationship. I think he drove it home more when he was talking about like the union of like the mother and the father, and like how it's one's fire and one's water, and they're both like the dynamic creative. And I'm like, oh, like I like that because there's like this ability to not only surrender but to like expand, and like that creativity like comes with it. Like it's almost like living on the fly instead of being like, I don't know, pinned down to certain ways you want things to go or ideas of how things are going to be. Like, I think because like, I don't know, growing up I always kind of had to kind of try to suss things out, but at the same time, like I knew as soon as you touched an idea with the way you wanted it, it would never be that way, because out of the infinite possibilities of like the way things can go, like the chances of me knowing how they're going to go are slim. So like the more open I was and like kind of letting it fall into place and kind of like reading the room, like every time there was a change, like I think it helped my intuition sharpen instead of attached to like what I would want to happen or what I thought was going to happen. Because the less I attached to knowing, the more I got a little inflow of like this external wisdom that kind of balanced it out, and it would kind of like show me where I could be right and wrong. I don't know. It was more like a dance in a relationship than I think it is like a marriage in that way. But I like that analogy. I think it was like well balanced. But yeah, I think intuition for me has been pretty easy and natural, but I think it takes kind of like opening up to like everything else around you and kind of putting down just your own perspective or feelings. But yeah.
George, what do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah.
Well,
What do
can
you
I
think?
just add? Can I just reflect off of Britannia for a sec? I think you're reminding me of the previous chapter. Is like it's like intelligence. When it's kind of directed at, like you said, like when you want that, you're like expecting something or you have like another outcome that you want. It's like that's the last one was like that's the intelligence that's like eclipsed, right? That's what he's saying, and that's like what and the moon is only reflecting ourselves back at us, right? And so it's like it's only where we can only see what's like what we want, like this thing that we think that we want, and not like and that's like a lack of wisdom, right? Because that's like because we don't have the wisdom to know that there's something else, that there's more to there's a bigger picture than our immediate like eclipsed intelligence.
True. Yeah, George, what do you think?
Well, I think the way that he's presenting it kind of presents a question, right? So do you guys feel like he's saying intuition is an ideal? Is an ideal state? Like something like a word like perfection, right? Something that's absolute, metaphysical truth, a end state.
No, he said that it wasn't, and that it was like naive to think so. It was like that was his criticism of like the Indian or like the Indian like Vedas, was that he said that they stopped at that acknowledgement of of getting to that plane.
Are you saying with the 12 stars at the crown for the apocalyptic lady? Yeah.
I mean, right before there.
I don't mean the finality of where the concept is, but in a metaphysical sense, right? The concept of intuition. So is there imperfect versions of intuition? Is another way of asking that question.
Yeah, I think being in flow is a lot of just being in intuition that, I mean, I would say for my life, yes, on earth, that it would be an ideal to have a very refined intuition, which would mean that I'm communicating with authentic forms of myself at moments and can, consider a lot of factors before moving forward in action. I don't think that it means that you're going to be all, happy all the time or, like everything's hunky dory, but I think that it just makes I think that it's so that you can travel farther than yourself in ways where you still know how to get back to yourself. Like maybe it's being in kind of authentic form in your human life so that you can travel to the stars and, experience the constellation energy, knowing what perspective you have on this earth life, and how that relates to others. So metaphysically, I'd say yes.
I mean, I
think-
kind of agree with what he's. Oh, sorry.
I think he's saying that it's a pretty perfect state. I think it's a sign of like achievement of the perfect. Because in the previous chapter, he even says that intuition is like, I think he relates it to the beginning of the book where he's like talking about how it's how like life shouldn't be toil, right? It should, and like, so he's referencing this. I think he references that with like life is like the joy of life, or what he talks about is like, it's not work, it's not toil, it's like abundant, it's like flow, it's like that flow, joy. And I think that's what intuition is to him, is getting into that particular flow of like of the full life force, and that's his definition of it, if like intuition of how to get there through this
I
like
feel like
kind of perfected intuition.
Go for it, Britannia.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean.
No, good.
I know I agree with what you guys are saying, but I feel like I almost like disagree in like the fuller extent. Like I feel like that's the moon, like talking in the sense of like, yeah, I agree with that, but I feel like when he even says it on like 545, he asks, is the experience of the transcendental self truly the ultimate of knowledge? Indeed, it lacks something important, the whole spiritual world. So I kind of feel like in a way, intuition is like the spearhead to like puncture like your intuition into the spiritual world. But I feel like when he touched on creativity and like its importance as like an alchemic presence in intuition, as like kind of like the bonding factor between intelligence and wisdom, there's like this creativity. And I think that that's kind of where he's going with it in the next card. But it kind of made me realize like, even with our own perceptions and thoughts and like releases and like transcendental selves, like there's multiple selves. There's not just one transcendental self, there's multiple selves. And then you have to acknowledge the multiple selves of everything in like everything beyond. So I think the implications of that are something that it's almost undescribable, but it is only intuition that you could be able to describe it in. It's like something that you've experienced that you feel is like no doubt true, but you can't even describe it to someone. There's no like pattern or structure or words or way to organize it in a way to like explain it to people. But I think, I don't know, that's kind of where he made me feel like, you know, when you like are laying under the stars really late at night and you just feel really small and you don't know why, you just feel like that vastness of like everything, and you feel like kind of small, and not like existential crisis bad, but like it's almost like a humbling experience to be like, oh, I'm this tiny little like invisible thing on this invisible speck of dirt floating through this vast like vacuum of expanding matter, and you know, somehow I have some intelligent thought to look out and feel this way about it. Like, I don't know. That's kind of how he left me feeling at the end of this chapter, and I think that was kind of where my intuition broadened because of it. Because I think it started out as like an individual thing, and then a transcendental self, and then transcendental selves, and then by the end of the chapter it was almost like the meditation we did with George on Sunday, where you like started, you know, in like this kind of like unit and working like symbiosis of like the place that you're at, and then like you slowly like dissolve into like this other thing. I don't know.
I agree. I think that's where, and that did bring it home when he talked about, and it did inspire my creativity, it sounds like, as well as you know, like it did with yours, when he talked about the microcosm versus the macrocosm. And I would say intuition for him on a microcosm scale, which is like Earth microcosm, you know, and even planets. And then you move beyond that in constant, I mean, just in like ritual, at least, like when you start doing rituals in the planets and the constellations, right? You're starting to work with macrocosm, cosmic energy. And that's where like intuition kind of like, there's something beyond that you have to tap into. But I think in microcosmic scale, it would be like an ideal state to be in pure inspiration flow. But then as you're talking about multiple lives, then you have to look beyond that at something else because it's no
Yeah.
longer just you. So I completely
Yeah.
agree with that.
What do you guys, I'm going to be asking a lot of questions tonight because
Yay.
I'm probing you guys. Yeah, I'm gonna just say that right up front so you know what I'm doing.
Probing us?
I consent. I
So-
consent
What are you probing me for? I don't want to be probed.
I consent, George. Continue.
Maybe some abduction ahead of that. But
Take me with
Actually,
you.
you know, like a little probing actually probably wouldn't hurt, but I would like to hear what information you get back from your
yeah.
probes.
So let's talk about one leg of the triad, right? Really, it's an ascending triad because there are levels to the triad. They're not equal. They're composition of two different things, as he is laying out, at least in his conceptual framework, which is intelligence, which has been talked about in the previous arcanum, and also the sense of the sun, which is wisdom, the representation of wisdom. All the discussion around this chapter is really about wisdom, right? Or at least it started with wisdom, and he really quickly deviated from wisdom. He talked about the implication of the marriage of wisdom and intelligence because he couldn't wait to jump the gun. But along with wisdom is there's the entire discussion of the Western tradition of, number one, his assumption, I think, certainly there are suggestions of this within the text, that the childlike state, right, is superior to the state that you develop into further in your life. And that there is, in some sense, right, there is this emotive feeling, this sort of feeling that I got, that there is this suggestion that the imagery of the Gemini, right, the children, that it's a more ideal state, at least in terms of wisdom. So I don't know what you guys thought about that. Certainly in relation to yourself, right? Because really that's the only way that you can feel anything about those kinds of statements.
I mean, I think being old would be a more ideal state because you've returned to a childlike mindset with a full life experience. Which I wouldn't call children wise particularly. I mean, at least I don't see them as wise. I mean, I see them as pure and
Interesting.
but not necessarily incorrupt, and not in an incorruptible way, but in a way that like they could do wrong things, but it's not coming from any life experience. So, and there could be tendencies towards things that aren't per se like kosher, but I don't know that like I don't find kids at like fault for things like that because they haven't had like enough life experience to really go from. So, I mean, I would call wisdom more, like an old age where you've more returned to like a childlike state of wonder and kind of content or contentment, but you have the life experience to back the things that the perspectives that you have about it.
So how can anything you do coming from a purer state lead you to a place that is less pure, right? If your instincts are always, and this is what arises from the subconscious, from where most children are operating from, and their instincts are purer, how can anything they do be wrong? I mean, if we're just returning to a childlike state, which is to say our instincts are returning to the childlike instinct, why do we return to that place? Like,
doesn't it kind of have to do with, sorry.
Go ahead. That's the question.
Oh, doesn't it have to do with when he was talking about how like no evil fruit can grow from a good tree and like vice versa in that way? Where he was like, if you come from a pure source, like it'll be a pure fruit. And it's about like that kind of acknowledgement and wisdom of like the child doesn't question the intuition. It's like, I think that was part of the part that made it stronger, is that like adults have to counter their intelligence to let wisdom back in, whereas I think children are always waiting to soak up the wisdom.
Oh.
And their intelligence grows like equally with it going up, but it's in it like, because even in the triangle, it says intelligence turned upward. It's not just regular intelligence. It's intelligence turned upward. And so like, I feel like childlike is a metaphor too, because you're looking up. Like you're always constantly like, you're not in a hierarchy, but in a way you are. Like it's an inherent hierarchy. Like if you're a child, that means that there's something that has something to teach you above you that's just older and wiser. And then you have to kind of like let that wisdom like wash in. And I don't know, I think that's why I really like that metaphor a lot. Because I at first you're like, oh, you know, like old is wise, but then I always think of like the jadedness or like the scales on people's eyes that they've accrued. And like I've spent a lot of time around old people in my restaurant, and like the happiest old people are the ones that act like they're still children and they're still silly and making jokes and goofing off. And then there's other people that you can tell just like can't face whatever it is, and they're just not happy. So I feel like that childlike state is ideal for intuition to grow there. I think it gives it the most like fertilizer and the most ground to grow in. But the older we get, we have to like be a constant gardener of like what our boundaries of intuition and wisdom, I mean our intelligence and wisdom are, to like kind of pave a path towards like a, I don't know, that's why like there's no better intuition. I think you acknowledge more the more that you can accept about not having answers and having to kind of let the wisdom come from somewhere else, like above you, from whatever that is. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think even people that I've known that have had like maybe genetic disposition to like really yucky things, but that were taught out of them by their parents, have a very interesting, like, I think are maybe how do you say, skew the answers of the type of pureness of children equation. Because yeah, I do think some people are like prone to do yucky things, but I think it really, like, a lot of times, I mean, it's a combination of things. So there's not, and no, it's hard because parenting is very hard thing to talk about because people are very sensitive about it. And there's a lot of like trauma around how people are raised, and it shapes so much of our lives. Because yeah, you're looking up at something, and if something can't provide for you, then there's just a lot of funkiness that can happen, and that usually like goes about for generations and generations, like generational trauma and whatnot. And so yeah, I think it's a lot, if you're not given the tools early, then it's going to be a lot harder to have it just means you're going to have to work a little bit differently in order to, you know, kind of have an intuition that can come from a state of childlike wonder, because you had to grow up really fast, you know, you had to make those decisions for yourself. I don't think I'm describing it right, but
no, yeah, no, I think it's interesting that this topic's coming up, because I hate to bring this up, but it's like so relevant. It almost like opens the can of worms for you. Recently there was a 6-year-old who brought a gun to school and shot his teacher.
oh,
A 6-year-old. They don't even know what to do about it because it's never happened.
oh,
So yeah, this is like is there childlike wonder? Is there nature? Is there nurture? Was that a evil tree that dropped an evil like apple, you know, like that? I don't think that. I think it is a combination of nature and nurture, but I think nature and nurture is another way of saying intelligence and wisdom. And if they didn't have either one of those things in their life, why do you expect them to do anything different?
yeah,
If there hasn't been any like physical or metaphysical structure built for this person in this world, they've been like running rogue for 6 years like a freaking banshee in the world, thinking that they can bring a gun to school and shoot someone. Like as horrible as it like, I don't think this should be happening, you know, and it breaks my heart that these are things that we have to talk about. But I think that that's the world that we live in right now, and it's like kind of a wake-up call that we all do need to like kind of level up and like help each other out and like kind of point out things in ways and be supportive to like those circumstances. Like most people you interact with, including yourself, are not going to have a perfect balance of intelligence and wisdom. I mean, we struggle for that every second of every day.
mhm.
I mean, like the ones that know to do that do, but there's other people that just think that it's like just chaos, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't been shown that there's any type of like beauty to you wondering or inspiring or, you know, taking joy in the world, then it'd be really hard to get there.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. That's why I brought that up, because I was like, yeah, I mean, that brings like a lot of philosophical questions to the surface too, you know, that are a lot deeper and that, you know, go down another tangent that we don't need to go down, but you know.
It's important though. What were you gonna say,
Yeah,
Cody?
that that like speaks to that marriage. The child is the marriage of the offspring of the marriage of wisdom and intelligence, right? In some sense. I don't think he says that straight out, but that's kind of what you get, because there is this childlike thing.
The imagery is the Gemini imagery, right? Represents intelligence and wisdom. So
Yeah, there's two kids and one's
Right,
touching
but
his
they're-
heart and one's touching his.
but in a sense, they're also like offspring of. I don't know. That's what I'm getting. Like
the union of
because
the
there
two
is
children, right? If it's a perfect union, then there
right,
is the metaphysical perfected child as
Mhm.
an entity
right,
that consists of two parts, right? But you know, he certainly reasons that way, right? And
right.
I'm not sure it's intuition that arises from that. I do think that intuition is a side effect of the or a way that you can talk about or perceive, or a way to a higher order, like you know, whatever this thing that he is talking about. But intuition in this chapter, for me, certainly feels much more like it describes a effect, something that you can observe, or something that is a prime moving force that is beyond, that's a higher order of prime moving force that leads you higher in the hierarchy of things, leads you higher, closer to gives you the path, give you a way to reach for like a higher into the hierarchy, right? And in fact, that's, you know, later on in the chapter, he does talk about when you carry this enough, right, and you're really working it, then it opens up access to your individualized star.
Right.
Yeah. So
So are you kind of saying that
Well-
intuition is like a transcendental vehicle of like a way of thinking, like a vehicle of thought that you can use to access like transcendental wisdom?
yeah, it's for me, right? It's
Yeah,
like
no.
before uranium decays into its component part in the radiation process, right? You know, it's uranium before it decomposes into lead and whatever
Mhm.
else, right? So it's like a description of a pre-differentiated state, or going
Mhm.
backwards to a more ideal state. But his assumption around that is that this unconscious, spontaneous wisdom, right? It's a critical component of this. Of course, it is also informed by intelligence as well. But there's some problem around that, right? Has been for greater than more than 2,000 years of discourse about evil and the sources of evil, and the, you know, can something pure, right, be corrupted, right? Which is the entire story of the Western tradition of you know, of these kinds of discussions that has been going on for a greater part of forever in the West. So it's interesting to observe his sort of assumptions that he's just sort of expecting you to kind of just uptake, right? And I certainly detected the smell when he was going through his lines of reasoning, and you know, but you know, for the benefits of moving on in the chapter, I
Well-
kind of just take it for what it is.
Well, I can
Well,
tie it into the chapter in a way too in a second.
he's coming from a place of like this, like there is like the Christian eschatology, like this triumph of good over evil, that there's an inevitability of it, right, as well, of so it's like that's what he's coming from. It's like that's what he's pulling us along with, is like, and like, yeah, like I think related to what Britannia said, and this was I wanted to say this earlier, but I didn't get a chance. But it's like he's compelling us to, like, yeah, like bring these things together so that we can embody that ideal state in the world, So, and the more people that do that, in a sense, like the more less likely a 6-year-old will shoot his teacher, like, because it's like bringing that karma into the world. That's the sense I get, and that's part of the inevitability of the resurrection. And
So is that prescription? Is that hypothesis? Is that method? It's like in a lot of Christian philosophy, these things are not separated out, right?
Yeah,
but
well, that's what he's talking about with Aquinas, is that like, and scholasticism is that's like
prescription, huh?
It's like a method of thinking that gets you into
like the focus, the end goal is to reach, right? Is to reach for something outside of yourself, as opposed to like some kind of intellectual understanding of something. And I think this is a critical perspective, that when you read someone like this dude, right, you have to keep in mind that he is operating in that realm. And I feel like a lot of our discussion has been about our sort of the dissonance that we feel personally with this sort of methodology. But I think it's important to acknowledge that methodology has a long history, and it is a methodology with a very distinct goal of helping you to reach, helping you to go somewhere else. And this is completely consistent with the Hermetic philosophy, right? It's completely, and this is why this is for me, this is this chapter and chapters preceding it as well is a pretty amazing synthesis, right? He's bringing all these elements together, even though they might not have historically been put into the same bucket. He's really pulling together all of these different traditions, one of which we have some relation to, even if the religion, even if the spirituality isn't compatible or it's just alien, and helping us to be able to cross over, and be able to relate to a different and potentially equally profound, equally well thought out tradition with its own assumptions, and putting aside some of our biases in the way that we are approaching this material. Like my criticism that, look, it seems like it's just it's a creative endeavor more than it's more than it's like a clear cut path, with like, here's the action part, here's the planning part, here's the theory part, here's the hypothesis, this is how right, in a very intellectual method, when in fact, as Cody suggests, this belongs, this has its own method, its own history, its own current that it's operating.
Doesn't he even mention like meditative scholasticism or something like that? Like he's actually like claiming that his tradition is from that scholastic tradition.
Which that's the part, that's when I started really disagreeing, I think, with him in the chat, or not disagreeing, but he went into, like, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then he really, really criticized mathematics, I think. Page 539. At the top, and that's when I was like, well, I just think, again, it just kind of reflects his like, for him saying that, the Vedic philosophy ends with, I was like, okay, you don't really know like all about how like these type of philosophy, like I think it's just kind of presupposing like that he knows everything about math, so he could say like, well, math doesn't get you the same results as scholastics. And it's like, well, wait a second, like I know a lot of like,
I think my impression is, when he was talking about that, is that math is a subset. It focuses on a subtopic of the entire human experience. And I feel like his entire treatise, this entire book, is about human. It's about the complete human and the elevation of the complete human, as opposed to some subdiscipline of the human experience, right? So he's suggesting that mathematics is useful, but probably does not encompass more of the human, right? The greater human experience is, it's something that was conceived to describe something, like quantities, qualities, right? I believe he even used those words, as opposed to the greater human subjective elevation of looking at the star, right? Of being guided and operating out of intuition. I think that's what he, at least according to the way that I read it, that's
Okay.
the sort of feeling that I got. He suggested that.
Yeah, he kind of splits hairs when he goes into the difference between the intuition of words and the intuition of force.
Yeah.
Which I thought was cool, because he's saying that, you know, like the shepherds are you know, intuition, and then the mages are another type of intuition, but like they both end at the midpoint, which is the manger, and they take, you know, two different journeys and have two different types of intuition. So it's kind of like representing the transcendental selves, like the multiples. But I wanted to ask, so they weren't like, he looked down on them for asking Herod and his people, because like you're not supposed to look like horizontally for something, you're supposed to be looking upward to the star, right? That's what his point of bringing that up was.
Yeah, he's making an analogy that those are agents that are yeah, of a lower
From
order.
society
Okay.
versus of God.
Yeah, no, I got that. I really like that whole like analogy, or yeah, the extended metaphor there too. I know a lot of I think it's like literal in the sense that they see it as a miracle, and I see it as kind of more of like an allegory. But I think it was easier for me to read and actually like accept as like an actual truth for them in that way. I don't know. It's kind of like hearing somebody have like one of those synchronistic experiences. And you're like, okay, of course you were being guided by intuition and like something higher than yourself. Like, that's beautiful. Like you were in flow state. Like that's fantastic. But yeah, I think like what you were saying about intuition and having like that vehicle as like a historically proven method for, I guess, accessing higher versions of reality and like understanding was like really driven home in that part for me, and I really liked
And then
that
the end product,
because it was more of like,
go ahead.
oh no, sorry, I was done.
Then the end product, right? What they're being led to is the complete picture, right? It's the Christian eschatology. It's the birth, life, and death and resurrection of Christ, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
You know, that's like the end of history.
It's like it's like falling down, right, to eventuality. I think the stars serves in the same purpose as the center of the mandala, right? It's like a attractor, and that if you keep pointing yourself, aligning yourself to it, you will end up in the center through the myriads of paths that you walk through in the mandala. I think that's the suggestion, and the start is the instinct towards that, and the intellect is the understanding of how to get there, and getting the instructions, right? Getting the turn by turn direction from the shepherd.
Mhm.
And in that is the encapsulation of the metaphor of the intellect and the interaction with wisdom. That whole duality that he's trying to marry into this eventuality is it basically suggesting a path, suggesting a way of getting there. So in that way, intuition in this chapter very much is like a higher order instinct, so to speak, that you should be guided from as you continue your practice or continue your studies or meditations or contemplations. It's really trying to suggest that you should be looking more towards that as a way to help you elevate.
I really loved that parable. I loved it so much.
And I think it's interesting because it's like that. I have the question of like, what is transcendental? What is actually transcendental? And is he saying in the sense, and Britannia, I know you talked about this already, but is he saying in a sense that the transcendental is just another aspect of the wholeness, that there's more than transcendental in a sense, or that like I have a hard time believing in transcendental anything anyways. Like I think everything is just here already. There's no like I feel like transcendental is like a human concept that we've created to explain something, but it's really like, and maybe it's helpful in some way, but maybe that like contemplating the transcendental is part of what's helpful of it. But I think everything is just immanent, right? It's just here. I mean, I have a hard time not thinking of it that way. But I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously, I don't know what it could be, but I have a hard time conceptualizing of transcendental anything.
Well, I mean,
You know, I
it's
feel
kind of
it's
like
all-
the marriage of that idea and the marriage of your disposition for it, because I think he says, you know, like the birth, the resurrection, the death, like all the, you know, the Renaissance, all that is like a cycle, but it's all happening all at once, you know, in that way that's like the alpha and the omega are like one, so they are kind of like two sides of the same coin. I love the idea of transcendental, but I think it's so interesting because you and I think a lot alike and read a lot of like Eastern culture and stuff. Um, but I like it because I agree with you saying that it's like a way of humans like trying to define something that they can't explain. And I agree with that. But I think that it's kind of like almost like an upward flow of like the thought is coming from like an upward place, and that it kind of acknowledges that there's things beyond that are for better, or like for lack of a better term, like immortal. Like there's a timeless realm beyond that we all belong to, and that's kind of where I find it to be kind of safe and nurturing, and almost like the place I go back to when I meditate and stuff is like trying to go back to that place, because I feel like that's like the most home you could ever be in the universe, alive or dead, in time or space, or you know what I mean. Like I don't know, but maybe I have a different like feeling and interaction with it.
I mean, I mean, that's kind of like my a Buddhist critique from my version of Buddhism that I've received is that like radiant emptiness, that state of like emptiness. I mean, I could, you know, explain it more, but I think you all know what I'm talking about more or less. Is always there and always available. And it's like that's all that there is. Like there isn't anything else. It's just like a fabrication. I can't explain it well right now, but you know what I mean. It's like that's like the silence in between thoughts that is just like the perfect bliss. Like,
So,
and that's
so
all there is. So any construct is like excessive. It's like it's like causes the generation of the Maya and the delusion, right? So it's like,
so are you saying then that I kind of get what you're saying. I feel like the term transcendental, right? It's really contextual, and it depends on who you ask.
yeah.
For me, transcendental is a concept that is both upwards and downwards and sideways. That means that you can transcend upward, like in the way that he talks about it in this book, right? Reaching for the divine is transcendental. In the fact that more than one person reach for the divine, then that does imply transcendental something. And transcendental, if you want to just use definition, then would simply be any instinct that is shared by any two persons for no apparent means, right? Because without that, and transcendental has no definition without the oppositional concept of an individual, somebody that has their own formation and life experience, and something that's just, even if it's entirely phenomenal. And with transcendental for me simply means something that is shared through no apparent means between any two individuals. Like we can't be having this conversation if, according to that sort of thought, there's not transcendental something between you and I, because there's no way for us to understand one another otherwise, in any way, shape, or form, regardless of how we make sounds or what we gesture, because there's no shared understanding, like not recognizing something that is so alien because you can't relate to it at all. So for me, that's what transcendental
Wait,
means.
what is
It's
the-
that shared thing.
Isn't that
What
the
is the
space in between?
transcendental that's in between?
So
that
it'd be the
allows
space
it?
in
What is
between,
it?
which maybe is the same. Maybe you're both described. I mean, it sounds like, George, what you just described is the space between.
If it's
Yeah.
emptiness, however, then there would be no meaningful thing that you can communicate.
But from emptiness comes everything.
Yeah, but what it would create Maya, right? Like
Right.
it's everything that has no meaning. In fact, there's no way to relate to anything if it's just emptiness. There's no
Yeah,
way to
like maybe
Right.
out of emptiness, right? You can't unless if you're God, right? That's, in the beginning it was the word, right? That was the first Maya.
Right.
if you want to
Right.
interpret it that way.
Yeah.
But I kind of think of it as like two axons, like in your brain are two neurons, and there's a space in between, but there's the firing of the electrical charge. And that's kind of like the transcendental experience of like sharing a thought with someone. And that thought is not in me or you, it's in the air between, almost like, I don't know, for lack of a better metaphor.
The spirit of fire, like the fire. Yeah.
It's like, and that's why I kind of like when he brought it back to fire and like your creativity of that.
Well, fire and water, because yeah, it's like you needed something to conduct that fire to move through the space
Mhm.
too. So
Exactly.
I guess it wouldn't be empty then, but it would contain something that we don't know to create life, which would be fire and water, elements of the ether. Which I think ether has those kind of properties to it, though, from the brief little alchemical texts that I've read.
So is the transcendental ultimately, I mean, like Aquinas says, is the God that is the first cause, right? The primal cause. Is that what, like, is that the ultimately what we're talking about is like ultimately transcendental? That
I think it's from the
anything to be.
I think it's the other direction. I think it's the quality that allows you to break out of your individuality. It's the thing
Yeah.
that unshackles, unlimits you, because there is this greater context, right? There is this greater, or else there's no way for you to relate to any experience. It would just be babble all over the place. There's no patterns. There is no greater truth. There are no currents of any kind, right? There are nothing that is not entirely purely illusional. And therefore, even the individual itself, the concept of the individual would be almost entirely incomprehensible. So transcendental simply means the context in which you can transcend the self, whatever the self means to you. I think that is, for me, that is sort of the, when we talk about in transcendental experience, an experience that takes you out of yourself, whatever that means to you.
And that's necessary to even have
Yeah,
concept.
to elevation, to go anywhere, right? Or to even know you're heading anywhere, because without the context, you are where you are, right? That is actually the statement you would be making. I am where I am.
Right.
Where do
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I
Nowhere
never
else to
really
go.
understood what transcendental really meant.
Yeah.
And I just haven't. I think partially because it isn't really much of a concept in Buddhist philosophy. It's not particularly talked about. I think some of it, there's like some critique of Vedas in Buddhism that talk about it as a critique of transcendental philosophy, but yeah. But as far as like understanding what transcendental means, and I know like Kant talks about it a lot, but I haven't read Kant, so I don't know.
Well, the
See,
Western
I don't know the
tradition,
context of the chapter in that sense either.
the Western tradition is, it would not hang together at all without the concept of transcendence, right? In the sense of abstractions or concepts that are ideal, versus the instances of these things that are ideal, like a horse. It's a horse is not ideal, but individual horses are instances of that ideal, right? So without the concept of transcendence, you cannot have the ideal horse. Yeah.
That's
Or we can't even be having this conversation, because the word would have no meaning. It's the other way of talking about it in a very concrete way.
And in the Aquinas sense, then it is that like primal cause of God that allows that to happen.
Yeah, everything goes back to God, right?
That is actually the ultimate transcendent, right?
Yeah, it's working backwards and this is the tree of life and all of the stuff. You're reaching backwards. You're going in the reverse direction, up a tree, right? Yeah. I think this is all pointing towards the same sort of instinct or same sort of directionality. That instead of continuing this way, you go this way. You know, instead of doing VR, you know, you commune with God, right?
Okay, trying to kind of move on into topics we haven't talked about.
There's so many good ones here.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, okay, I'm still kind of hung up on the math thing. I'm gonna take it back a second. I really
Read the quote.
what?
Read the quote.
I mean, it's really the whole, I mean, it's a lot though. One could object, so the page 539, it starts there. Because I mean, with the argument for scholasticism, I feel like we cleared up a lot of why he talked so extensively about that, because it feels like yeah, like a prescription, or like the, you know, kind of way of developing and refining your intelligence and wisdom to come to a place of intuition. Like, I understand that for him. I think that though, again, if you become really adept at mathematics, I think you get to points like that, because there's no, when it gets to, and maybe this is just my love for that part in that, you know, physics and math had in my life in that way, that I really think that you have to be a philosopher when you talk about abstract math. And there's no way to come up with new like theories on, because math is just describing how the world works. So in a lot of senses, when it gets to theoretical
But I
spaces,
think his critique is that you cannot arrive at 1 + 1 = 5 with mathematics. It's deterministic. It has no ability to transcend itself.
but
So it's trapped by the
it does though.
How? You can define new ways of doing it, right? There are new base rules, but the basic mathematics, right? It's
Basic.
deterministic in many ways. It's predictive, yeah, of course, right? It's but it is something that is a creation purely out of our attempt to describe something. It's describing quantities and sometimes qualities indirectly, right? By relating them to quantities. And that's it. That is its subject matter. And if you feel like the world is nothing more than an expression of abstraction in terms of quantity, then yeah, okay, sure, right? It's like a language it's like a specialized language that is not entirely human. It's describing things. It's describing phenomena. I think that's the critique. It's
Which again, I mean, I think if
There's
yes.
but there's whole philosophical schools of like that believe in mathematics as pointing towards the divine, right? So
Sure,
like Pythagoras, right?
Pythagoras, right?
Yeah.
For him, and you know, there are subsequent, and obviously the author disagrees with the Pythagorean school. He thinks that stream of development sort of has, you know, had a definite ending point, and there are some problems with it. And subsequently, right, we're not Pythagorean. You know, we leverage the techniques of the mathematics with some problems, the mathematical nature, to reach for the divine, right? In the Western tradition, and that's why we're not doing math to find God, right? Unless we're watching the movie Pi.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the movie Pi.
Yeah, you know, like yeah.
I mean, again, I do think that when though you get into more abstract concepts, like where's an electron going to show up around an atom? Like you can't see it. Like once you observe it, it doesn't exist anymore. It stops being in the space that you want it to be at. And those type of things like are being understood by math all the time. And those are like very interesting, you know, puzzles that
Where this kind of breaks down is observation, right? We
It's a
cannot.
reaction instead of an action.
There is for him it's really important not to be constrained, right? Like the thing that you're leveraging should always be incorporating a greater like a greater ability to reach up. And for me, I think he thinks mathematics is useful, right? But he does not think mathematics really fully encompasses the human experience.
Do you
There
agree
are
with that?
phenomena.
With his
Well, that's why there is a separate. That's why there is a separate field discipline, and mathematics grew out of philosophy, right? It used to be part of philosophy, and it split out into philosophy. And now we have philosophy and mathematics. And the reason why for that is that it had its own development, and there's some, it became more important in our day-to-day life. But philosophy questions even the assumptions of mathematics. If it's not observable, right? Then in the purely abstract space, how do you relate that to our experience? Aside from, well, if we can observe something, then we can count it, and if we can count it, then we can measure it, right? But there are things in the human experience. There are things that we do as people that transcends that does not require those
They're
kind
not
of,
observable.
and
Yeah,
they're
well,
not just a phenomenon describing, predicting, abstract language. There's something that is more than that. It's kind it's it's kind of like it's almost as if we like to say mathematics is the mind of God, and I would say that it is just one of the ways that is expressed, right? It's not all of the ways it is expressed.
I think though that's just because we don't know how to express it mathematically yet. And I don't know that we'll ever get there. I'm not saying that it's like something that we should particularly be striving for, because then again, you run into breaking the universe type of, problems. But I mean, I don't think we will ever be able to, but I just think that's also because we don't know how to describe it that way yet. I don't know.
But
I don't know why I'm so triggered by this. So I
yeah,
apologize.
I mean,
I'm not convinced yet fully.
well, I feel like math. Oh, sorry.
Go
I was
ahead,
gonna,
Britannia.
I feel like math is like an analogy for building the tower in the chapter of the Tower of Destruction, because you're trying to understand by building your tower from your small understanding upward, and that's a reaction to the phenomena. It isn't the actual phenomena. So like the actual action is the thing that he's talking about, and like math is just a way of measuring our reaction to it, instead of like being able to like acknowledge the actual action as it's happening. I think that's more of like, it's more of like a wisdom and intuition, or wisdom and intelligence union, whereas like math, I think, is intelligence heavy and can use creativity in the guise of intuition, but I feel like it lacks like a wisdom outside itself. Like you understand a concept and you're trying to make a like solidified like terrestrial way of understanding that, but you have to basically, you can't encompass the whole idea, so you have to make this like equation that barely scratches the surface of a concept. So I feel like math is a reaction to the original action, and that's why it kind of makes it like not better or worse for understanding, but it can't be the key. Like I think the key is a bigger part of it. Like I mean, I think math is just like a component of the key.
Is that similar to Bergeson's description or criticism of intelligence?
Yeah.
Is in the previous chapter, like it's describing dead things. It's like describing what's already happened to predict what's happening. Like, so it's not in the life stream. It's like it's dead. It's like describing that which is, it's like describing a dead universe, or like in the sense of like the anti-animist ideas, like
he says it in this
universe
chapter
is just
too. He
set
says
in
something about how
space,
you
and
like,
it's
if you're looking
like
like at a different
can be
place, you're like
described
looking
and
at.
figured out.
There's a lot of glitches going on.
Yeah,
I don't
dead and
know.
alive.
There's a lot of glitches going on. Is that somebody check your internet? I don't know. Full bars over here. I'll turn my VPN off just in case that's having something to do with it. So if it's wonky. Did I just break it? Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
When
Sorry
in
about
fact it is the human that is having the intuition that modifies the mathematics. So the order in which things happen in mathematics, it is a human creation. It is a human language for description. In that the creativity within mathematics should not be ascribed to mathematics. It should be ascribed to people. The instincts for creativity, the ability to come up with new ways of descriptions, new formulas, new mathematics. These are human intuitive human creation. So to
Mhm.
mistaken that for the inherent property of mathematics, I think would be a mistake. And I think there is there generally, you know, people really do ascribe a lot of magical magical things to mathematics as if it has an intelligence of its own. And I would say that it is actually closer to something like a tree of life, where it's actually pointing. It's for us to operate on something that resembles the best version of what we currently are, or what we currently believe, right? Just like the many versions of scientific description of gravity or the physical phenomenon of time and space. All these things arise from our instincts. So it's actually human. It's not mathematics. So don't mistake the tool for the operator of the thing. I think that's yeah.
Is that similar to then it's like the reflection that's in the eclipsed moon is like the reflection of ourselves. So it's like that's the intelligence that it's reflecting, is that
Just because
it's only ourselves, it's only our own language that's created this descriptive.
Yeah, and it's a cumulative, right? It just happens to have the benefits from a long history of development. And it is a thing that involves many people building, on the shoulder of giants. So it has power. It's just that it is a human power. It's even beyond our current understanding, and it will always be beyond our current understanding because we keep finding out more stuff. And then we're trying to describe them or predict them or whatever physical phenomenon. But these are human activities. These arise out of the human in our ability to describe and comprehend and predict, not the other way around. Mathematics is not. It's not. It is a thing. It's a language that we have created.
But I kind of think the mathematics like draws into like I have this quote on like 536 where he says the intuition combines two certainties: essential certainty, that of essence, and the consistent certainty, that of consistency. So I can see what you mean where like math is more of like the consistency of something where you're like counting a quantity to like point you in a direction, whereas like the essence is like that human or that individual or that transcendental like experience, right?
Yeah.
And then they together form the postulative faith. So you have like that faith that's based off of almost like no reason in a way.
Or not only reason. It's
Or just
includes
not
more,
only
right?
Yeah.
Reason being only a component. Or sometimes you transcend reason, right? To operate in a way that's entirely nonsensical based on current reason, only to arrive at a place in which you can further then develop your reasoning or thinking process. That he talks about the lack of thought versus the lack of instinct, and then he also talks about then the transcending of both, right? By incorporating this entity encapsulates both of them, and so therefore you can move. You can move in a space that allows you to transcend either, gives you a directionality.
Yeah, that's why I love his metaphor of the star, even bringing it back to that, where they have that postulated faith where like they're kind of doing something that would seem like inconsistent or like lack of essence because they don't I don't know, they're following an intuition that's like that greater, like a greater knowledge is pulling them there. And it's beyond reason in a way, like it would seem crazy to an outsider trying to be logical about that endeavor, but because of that intuition you have like an questioning faith in the circumstance.
Yeah. Having intuition gives you access to the higher order intelligence as well. That's something that he talks about and suggests, right? Higher order
Yeah,
wisdom, higher order intelligence.
it brings an absolute certainty of the cooperation of faith, firsthand, and intelligence in the kingdom of intuition.
Yeah, faith, that's a really interesting concept in this book that I've also struggled with.
I like his
faith.
faith and creativity
But it's-
in this chapter. It really, I don't know, solidified things for me in a way.
But I mean, like, faith is a fundamental Christian struggle, right? That's like,
It shouldn't be if you're Christian. You
Yeah.
should just have faith. That's like what they pride
Well,
themselves on.
I think Catholics have it a little bit different, like somewhat.
Yeah, it's the you have to struggle, right? It's not that absolute blind faith. In fact, he suggests otherwise in this chapter very clearly. It is an informed. It is informed. In fact, the closer you reach, right, the more you reach, the further you develop. It should strengthen your resolve, but it is an active process of earning more and more. It's a process of developing more connections with the God, and this way it's very much hermetic, right? It's a union. It's not a worship from a purely purely operational, from just running through a set of rituals, right? As supplication to a divinity, it's more like in the older tradition where you're union. You literally are in union with your God. Right? It's kind of a different perspective.
I really like the idea of it being a process and the way you proposed it just now.
No, he proposes it. I think. I think it's kind of an assumption in the way that he writes about it, right? It's a stepwise, like walking up a circular steps.
Yeah, I felt like it was more of a co-happening when I was reading it, and I was like, wow,
Yeah.
this is a lot to take in all at one time, but like more of a process kind of breaks it down into more tangible ways of viewing each step too. Because okay, cool. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful, like, that is like calling on the Christian tradition of the type of like active faith that is practiced ritually. It's like,
Yeah.
it's impressive, and how like people's struggles with their faith have led them to these incredible mystical experiences in Christianity.
Yeah.
And Aquinas himself, like, using the scholastic tradition, using like Aristotelian logic to construct these like arguments for God and like the existence of God, but not even like in doubt of God, but just like the way of like understanding like a map towards God in a sense, like an intellectual
reaching.
map.
It's the process of his process of understanding, right? Reaching a greater understanding, which is the intellectual aspect of it. But he is never in doubt, right? So the doubt, of course, doubt arises, but his activities are to shore himself up, right? It's to gain even greater faith, right? If that's possible. For us, it's a finite state, right? It's binary. You have it or you don't, but it's not. That's kind of a oversimplification, right? Yeah, you have to develop your own sense of what that is, and for different people, they arrive in different methods, and I feel like you really get a sense of that when you read some of the classical Christian philosophers. They really demonstrate this way of working at reaching for God in the way that they do, right? In the very scholastic kind of way, constructed, philosophical, right? Everything is pointing, but they're guided by the star. There's no doubt about that. So everything that they do reaches for it. It's directional. It's very much like everything we do is in support, in praise of, in and glorifying and understanding our in union with our God.
There's a lot of similar stuff in earlier Islamic philosophy too. Does
Yeah.
the same thing.
Same source, right?
Well, and of course Jewish. So
Yeah, it's the same source.
Yeah.
You know, same long tradition, right?
yeah, but generally the Islamic and Christian have the benefit of the of like Plato and Aristotle more.
The Greek,
generally
yeah.
more.
Yeah, the Greek influence, Egyptian influence as well, by indirectly. So yeah, that entire tradition of the Western development, you know, there's such momentum and it is definitely a very distinct thing, and it really comes through in this guy's work. Very,
What do
very
you think
strong.
caused? What do you think caused that distinction way back then? Like, was it? Do you think?
I don't think it was so distinct way back then, but over time, right, it has definitely gone down its own path. I think if you read a lot of Greek philosophy, it's actually there's actually points at which you could have very easily gone down the road to become more similar to, let's say, your Indian philosophy,
Yeah.
and or even your Far Eastern philosophies. I think it's just through sheer happenstance in the direction of development that it has developed a very distinct flavor and a very distinct direction in which it seeks truth. But
They remind me still of like the mages and the shepherds, in the sense that like one is going like Western is going more like literal material, build from like the ground up almost, and I feel like Eastern is almost like, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just saying that because I feel like they're all kind of the same in a way, where they're all trying to sometimes build from the individual out while also acknowledging from the top down. I don't know. I think I have a hard time finding differences, and that's why I was asking, because a lot of the time I just feel like I see so much similarity that it's hard for me to know what the differences are.
Yeah, West definitely has its own. It's a strong philosophical development, and the schools that won out are your Aristotelians that lasted for thousands of years. It has a set of assumptions based on previous assumptions, right? And it just happens to be the one that sort of won out. But there's a lot of discussion, and once again, if you read up some of the ancient Greek philosophers, it could have gone totally differently, but because history, right, it kind of has its own momentum going a particular direction.
It's like certain texts are lost, so like certain authors that have reference that might have some great ideas.
Libraries were burnt, right?
Like the library.
Don't even get me started on
like
the knowledge lost.
The knowledge lost, but you know.
But if that,
but nothing's ever lost, according to this chapter.
It might have been like more like picked up by some great philosopher that would have shared it, and
Well, based off intuition alone, and like what this chapter said, like nothing's ever lost. Like it's all happening, So I think that's kind of interesting too, because it makes me feel better about like lost knowledge, quote unquote, like knowledge that hasn't seen the light of day, or got hidden away, or was kind of triumphed over by a more popular idea. I think it's kind of interesting to think that out there in the ether and in intuition, those ideas will come about again when they're like kind of called forth, which is kind of exciting. I hope it's now.
It's very hermetic,
And there's argument that the Garden of Eden was like this kind of prehistoric place, right, where humans really did live in harmony with nature, whatever that means. And
can you imagine?
Yeah.
I could totally imagine it. I feel like just the concept being out there means that there's an intuition that either has come or will come to be, or both. And then we constantly revolve around that. Like humans have like peaks in populations, or peaks in like productivity or GDP, or however they want to measure it quantifiably, like you're saying about math being limited in defining like the state of humans. You can't be like, oh, our world is doing great because our GDP is up. It's like, obviously there's still like a lot of problems, So I don't know. I think it is like it points arrows in the directions of the places that we could pay attention, but I think yeah, like it doesn't say as much as the experience itself.
So a little bit further on in the chapter, just so that we can head towards the end.
I was waiting for a gap, but
Yeah. So okay. So here's a passage that is very stereotypical of this, and I think it will lead us to a slightly different place going towards the end. He's talking about the hexagram. Hexagram comprises of 2 triangles: Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul. So I think we talked about this before, but let's revisit this. So spirit and soul. Comments? What's the distinction?
I want to ask the distinction or maybe all 3 of you guys, and like, what is your distinction personally of soul versus spirit?
Yeah, same question.
Spirit is transcendent, soul is immanent.
I like that.
Throw that out there.
Yeah. Didn't he talk about this earlier in the book? Or
He
was
does
that
a little,
somewhere?
but at first I kind of disagreed with him because I feel like the distinction he made was really shallow, but I got where he was going, but I felt like there's a lot more depth. Like, I don't know. I wanted to propose a question, like I had it like circled because I wanted to just ask you guys what you felt and thought about it.
I mean, the
Yeah.
closest thing I could think of would be like your Kundalini energy, or at least like your spinal path, where one goes, or yin yang kind of deal, where there's flows of currents that transmit information in a certain way. But that's,
I kind of thought that like spirit, soul could be like the spirit in the now, in the ever changing, like now, like every second it's like the soul present, but like the spirit is transcendental past the soul. But maybe that was just because I felt like he kind of implied that inherent hierarchy of father above, mother below, father as wisdom, mother as intelligence.
which I don't
So-
really agree.
So I felt like,
I don't like how is this have you seen this hexagram presented in this way before? Any of you?
yeah.
Yeah. Where
Yeah.
father and mother, father's on top, mother's on bottom, spirit, soul on the right side, and daughter's on the left side. Where did you see that?
I feel like if I were to tweak it, I would put the mother to the left where the daughter is. I would switch the triangle and put the mother up where the daughter is.
Well,
And then
I
have
would-
the soul stay where it's at, but have the daughter below. But that was just like a nitpicky thing. I don't know.
I mean, nitpicky this, yeah, because it doesn't really, I don't see the correlations here like matching very well, like personally. Like
I think it should be tilted on its side and having soul and spirit up top, and then father,
soul and
mother
spirit
equal
is
to the
top or
sides, and then
bottom. Solar spirit is top or bottom, and then the corresponding father, daughter, mother, son would make a lot more sense.
no more like, hold on, let me see if I can show the book. Okay, whatever. Well, so you see how the soul and the spirit are both on the right side. If you tilt your book to where the spine is upward, both spirit and soul are upward. Father and mother are equal in the middle, and daughter and son are equal down. That's how I thought it should be.
Well, I don't think you can have
So then the spirit and the soul are
I don't think you can have points in the same direction, though, according to Tree of Life stuff.
well, according to that, but it just felt like more like whatever.
That's
I was just being, I don't know. That was my like creativity coming out, because I'm kind of like I don't know. I kind of like being a contrarian in some ways.
No, I need to look at it because I have not.
Well, then
seen
that's like, then that would be that.
So, Cody, this is around where the Zohar is being talked about.
Right. I found it, but
Yeah.
I was just like knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah, you kind of get a, yeah. So he's talking about a hexagram, right? The holy
Yeah, it's
union
page
between the Father,
548 for if anyone's listening. In the other.
Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I think he's referencing obviously what everybody knows with the Trinity, right? Moving from the Trinity to the hexagram, which is the meditation, right? How do you resolve the concept of Mary and Jesus, right? And things such as the Trinity with a greater concept of the luminous, right? The luminous Trinity, the higher order Trinity, and the triangle. I've never seen it presented quite this way, but
Okay.
it's the hexagram is a basic fundamental concept in Hermeticism, in magic, right? When you encounter the hexagram, it's the spirit and the material. It's all of those oppositions, or at least what we consider as oppositions, combining in a single individuality, right? Whereas the pentagram is the representation of the microcosm. The hexagram is the representation of the macrocosm. They resemble each other, but they are not the same. Right, the individual is not the same as the transcendent or the higher order thing that it's pointing at, and that those are the representations traditionally for Hermeticism for these symbols. And I think he's doing his creative merging of his philosophy and representing it, and representing his argument in the form of this hexagram, leveraging the triad, right? The divine Holy Trinity.
Which I have heard Yovhe Vovhe being, so later on page 548, he says, it teaches the great name God, Yod-He Vov-He, revealed Father for Yod, the Supreme Mother, first H, the Son, the first V, the daughter, the second He, or H. So I've heard that before. And I've heard that in relation to Mary before. And that's, that the full name of God represents Mary as well in that equation. I think that the hexagram is very interesting. I think that it is a more complete picture of a lot of, especially if you're talking Christian hermetics. I don't particularly agree with how it's, but I mean, again, I'm not hierarchical in the same ways that he is. So, but I also fundamentally don't agree with how he mapped it out here according to his thought, like father, mother, opposite, top and bottom. Because I think he did this very specifically, and I would really want to, being, a Kabbalist and, calling, having hermetics, like the position and the order of things really, really matter, so I would really like to hear why he would put, Holy Soul and Holy Spirit on the right, right hand path of that, and daughter, son on one side, where father, mother on top or bottom. It's very interesting. I don't know.
No, I agree. Yeah. I kind of get that. I got that a little bit when I was reading as well, but I think it's like it's more of a balance than it is like a hierarchical, like you're above or below. I mean, it's kind of like the as above so below type thing that he keeps repeating throughout different chapters too. It's almost like the pattern of things. I don't know if he's doing it necessarily to put like mother or like feminine energy down
Even
and
so,
father energy above necessarily. I think he's trying to equate them as like equal and opposing forces that kind of combine to make the micro and the macro into like a more full picture. But yeah, I mean, I always get struck by that too, especially because I know his like I guess Christian approach to it may prone that to be kind of like a subconscious layer that he reaffirms through chapters. But
I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I kind of been trying to get
biggest-
past that because I think it makes me like lose a little bit of like the deeper meaning when I'm like focused on like why the mother is below.
Well, no, and that's not even my biggest hang up with it, honestly. Like that doesn't,
Yeah.
but it's just like literally the Holy Spirit and the Holy Soul being on the right hand side. Just I'm like, I don't know, I can't.
If
Yeah.
you
My brain
if you
is not okay
if
with
you
it.
if you place Father, Father, Son, Holy Spirit as a spiral and as a counter spiral, you can place them in any position. I think the representation here has to do with order. Holy Soul, Holy Spirit belongs in the same kind of rarefied realm. Daughter and son is an affect, is an outcome of, in a sense, it's the destiny in a sense. So they're ordered on the side by the sort of thing that they are. And father and mother are actually transcendental principles.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
if you're working on the tree of life,
really?
right?
Oh.
Yeah.
Father and daughter, father and mother are not, they're not physical. they're transcendental concepts, right? In the same way that first, second, and third Sephra on the tree of life.
Yeah.
Is
Mhm.
what this
Oh,
is suggesting.
okay.
So this is not, this is not oppositional. This is not this is more
Correspondent
categoric.
necessarily.
Yeah, so the left side and the right side, kind of like the tree of life, right? There's some qualities that unite the left side. There's some qualities that unite the right side.
And it's
And there's a central pillar in the middle that is the fundamental, like sort of the middle path, right? This is more similar to that. There's this side with some of its fundamental, and here's this side with some of its characteristics that are more similar than opposites. So they're not oppositional in that way.
and it's saying that they're like the principle. It's like the active principle and the effect principle. They're on equal ground, right? The
Yeah,
active.
it's like that. It's all part of the steps of manifestation, right? So in some ways, there's a directionality here, in that there must be the father, and there must be like some affect, and then there is a destination for the son, right? The eventuality of the son, but without the mother, the son is not possible. Without the father, the daughter is not possible either, right? So it's like traversing the tree of life. Same sort of like current, right? Same sort of instincts here.
It's also the same, right? It's the same as like what he's saying about the moon reflecting the sunlight here, but it's like they have opposite roles in the opposite realms.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They are part of the, they're not the same thing, right? There is God that created the two light sources, right? But then one took a position, giving it a directionality, basically, is what's saying that history starts, right? There is some direction, because we're not talking about the rarefied realms in which there was nothing, and different orders of nothingness, which is beyond the first, beyond the God name, right? Beyond the crown on the tree of life. That was before. And then some things happen, and then all of a sudden there is a sequence of events moving from Sephra to Sephra. And so this is more like talking about that part of it. Like I feel like this is because this whole discussion is about working backwards, right? Working up and finding your way back to defining in the tradition that we have been suggesting and talking about, right? So I feel like this is very similar to that, going back up the tree of life in that hermetic way. But he's talking about it with a full-on context of the Catholic ideologies and some of the Christian thinking, right? So he's doing his own version of the creativity, trying to fuse together all of those disparate elements in some ways.
I feel like I practice more where Holy Soul and Holy Spirit is more prominent in my practice than Father, Mother. I think that's why I was really getting hung up on it, not necessarily in the hierarchy of or the oppositional aspect. Like, it doesn't matter to me whether Mother's on the bottom or the top, per se. That's not what I was here. But in terms of, and that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that these are like the Father would be like God, or something like it would
or
be
the active principle, or any of those things.
The Father principle there is higher on his radar than Holy Soul and Holy Spirit.
I wouldn't say higher. I would just say it's a pole. It's a pole.
I like the spiral analogy too, where you said the spirals, they could be on any point.
You can
They're
collapse
just-
and if you collapse it into 2D, any of this position can represent any opposition or any way that you look at. It just depends on how you flatten it, right?
Mhm.
Or where it is in the twisting. So I think don't get too hung up on the on the representation
I
here.
like
I think
things
it's
to
talking
be-
about something
I know.
that has a 3 dimension. Yeah, but it is,
Who
I
needs
mean,
to
if you were
say
taking
that
it sort of
then?
on the but he kind of does, right? He kind of in the wording of what he describes as, when he's talking about these principles, these fundamentals, they're not even really principles. They're like real, right? But these things, they might be not of the physical world. This is, it's almost assuming that you know something about the working with the tree of life, because these concepts are, I mean, straight. I mean, you can map this to the tree of life, these concepts. And in this way, he's really fusing together his religion with his practice, right? Hermetic practice, magical practice, like these hermetic principles are being fused in the explanation in this very, very creative way. And so, there's going to be some things that are going to be a little wonky, but then the tree of life itself is a little bit wonky, right? Like it's a human representation of a divine concept, right?
Just like that.
Yeah, it's like it's problematic, right? It's good enough for humans. It's basically, I think, what the consensus is to work with. But I thought that was pretty interesting, right? That there are definitely some things there that you can further contemplate and further meditate on, because that's not trivial.
Yeah, I was gonna say it kind of deepened my connection to, I guess, those different concepts and their interactions and their inseparability in the sense of seeing a bigger, more full picture, like kind of allowing all the forces to be acknowledged that are at work instead of it just being like chaos. I don't know. Because sometimes I think when I was younger, I would be like, oh, I prefer to see it all as like the chaotic mass that it is than try to like label it and pin it down. But this has become like a really nice template for seeing through chaos instead of like ignoring it or trying to pre-prescribe like patterns to something based off of like a human knowledge. It's more of like that intellect meets wisdom vibe that I think, I don't know, was like super, I don't know, really impactful with, I don't know, for me, I think it was kind of a bigger deal getting past like religious inclinations in the writing. Starting from the beginning, I think I thought I had like a lot more hangups, but by the end of like these chapters, I'm just like, I love this book and everything about it for the most part. So I think it's cool for me to see that I've mentally and like intuitively grown through some of my reactions to things, because when I did get to the symbol, I did feel like a deep connection to it and the information that it was trying to give me, or like what he was trying to say about it, not based off of like a religious standpoint, more of a spiritual one.
It helped you to transcend, right? To break out
Yeah,
from
I didn't expect that too. I was like, I honestly couldn't stop reading last night. I was up till like 3 a.m. I got like this burst of wind and I was like, oh, I thought I was gonna read a few pages and get really sleepy and go to bed, and I freaking stayed up and like mowed this thing down. I was like super into it.
So Haley, there's a passage just slightly more down from there. I think this really ties it together pretty well in terms of kind of resolving that hexagram, right? So he says in this passage, the Messiah with a capital M is the 7th term or principle of the hexagram. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Mother, Daughter, Holy Soul, Shekinah, or the community of Israel. He is the agent of all, the active summary of the bipolar trinity. So he's now using those words, right? Polar. Or as we have called it, the luminous Holy Trinity. So he's suggesting, right, there is these combinations and unions and sequence without which you cannot have this eventuality of the Messiah. And the Messiah, not necessarily as a single person, but as a necessary outcome of the interaction of these principles, or it's the destiny of these principles is the Messiah, is what he is suggesting. And so
Well,
Wait, can
Yeah.
you repeat that? I
the
really like
Messiah
that.
is Jesus.
in the tradition, in the religious tradition, the Messiah is Jesus, but there is Messiah, like there is higher order Messiah,
Which is like what Jesus represents.
yes,
which is the
right,
God in human form.
right.
God
God
and
in human form,
one.
and this is like a very complete, right? Like it wraps up so much of that Christian philosophical tradition in which you finally understand why Jesus occupies a particular position, because he represents the culmination of these interactions of these poles, of this in the complete embodiment of within the human form, right? He literally occupies one of these positions, right? So
Oh my God, you're blowing my mind on the Sephira now. How I see how the energy flows
Yeah.
up and like kind of funnels inward and then comes to like a narrow point in which it all has to kind of pass through.
So
Right?
yeah, I mean, it's just it's an expression, right? And it's a necessary expression, and it's encapsulated in a way that we can relate to, right? He literally is the resolution of all of this. He's the agent of all. All of these things are within him, expressed through him. But he is the seventh. He is not the sixth.
He is
Yeah.
the seventh point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
seventh point,
Raid star.
right? He is the seventh.
Is that what like represents that like agape love? It's like the seven was always associated like with agape love, which is like
Jesus
that
is
higher
always,
sense of love.
yeah, Jesus is always, he's always associated with this concept, right? Love. He's one of the, he is the representative
But
of
it's like
this
the love
concept
with the
on earth.
capital L, like the author would put it.
Yeah, he is the culmination. He's the finality, the eventuality.
Do you think the point of intuition is to come to that eventuality of that like fully emanating love, like that light? Is that what that is? Like the pulling forward from intuition. There's a light behind intuition that's shining, right? So there's a source from which the intuition arises.
I think
So
is all love. Like his always love, and it's always I'd say his intuition would be going back to Christ, which would reveal that love is behind everything.
right.
And he's already said like God is love, right?
And
Yeah,
Christ
love.
leads you to that love, which I would say the intuition, which that's probably what preface for the next chapter, right? Like the world is
it's moving.
Is behind the intuition, which would be incarnate of Jesus, which points you to love.
Well, the next chapter is judgment.
Oh, judgment, then the world.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Interesting transition in there, right?
And then moving into the fool, right?
Fool. Okay.
Fool in the
I love the fool. The fool.
Yeah.
The fool is good. I've been reading up on the fool a little bit because it came up in some Tara Bratch. I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. Tara Bratch. She's amazing. But she was bringing up like how the fool is acting as like you follow your intuition in the childlike state only. Like you only are in that childlike state and you kind of go straight to the postulated faith. Like the fool is just pure postulated faith.
We will see.
So it's almost like
We'll see.
I mean that's what my that's what my hypothesis of the unfolding is.
So
Sorry, my internet's being weird. I went back into my room because I wasn't getting video.
yeah, gotcha. We see you pop in and out on your video. So a little bit further down the page, right? He starts talking about the argument of the hearts, and I think that really wraps it up pretty well for this chapter, right? Where he's personally now offering up his his opinion, right? He even says so. This author is the person who's writing these lines, right? He's talking about the love from the father and the love from the mother, right, as being necessary components to help a person elevate, right, their principles. Let me see if I can find the exact. Something that I can wrap it up pretty well without having to read all of it, because it's a rather long discourse. Yeah. Well, here's one. The experience of parental love consists of two elements: the experience of paternal love and the paternal love. One and the other are equally necessary and equally precious. So this refers to, once again, that hexagon principle. Honor thy father and thy mother, right? It's truly divine. Yeah, celestial mother is no less than the father who is in heaven, pointing to the principle that these are necessary, and they're not. You can't, unlike a lot of the way that it's presented now. These are not separate principles. They're one and the same, right? He then goes on to meditations on the Holy Trinity, meditating on both the Trinity itself and the hexagram to make for the nine levels. This is when he's talking.
Oh, you're muted, Cody.
So the cherubim, what level are they? The first hierarchy? Are they like?
What do you ask?
The seraphim? Because
The seraphim-
cherubim are often like depicted as childlike angels, right? They're like the Cupid looking.
That's the way we represent them, right?
Right, but that's like seems so similar to particularly the Crowley
sun
version
card.
of the card,
Nice.
which has the two little. So I'm just wondering if there's a relationship with like the cherubim as kind of representing this card as well. I would think he would say that specifically, but he does talk about hierarchies there. And they're like at the top, right? Cherubim are like number 1 or 2. I know cherubim and seraphim are the top.
Well, there's.
Two, I don't remember which is which. Anyway, just.
I thought
question.
they were separate.
Well, they're separate. They're
Yeah.
two hierarchies. But they're 1 and 2, or
I thought the seraphim's the highest, but
seraphim's the highest. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure. Just because, like, I would think that, like, he would be talking about if it related to that. I don't know.
I was trying to look it up. Yeah, the highest orders are the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones.
Well, maybe he wouldn't be talking about the highest order in this sense either. So I don't know. Of the 9. But anyway, they're invoking some high up of the 9 in a sense. And maybe cherubim have something to do with how it's formulated too.
Is that on the Thoth deck, or does he mention that in this chapter?
That's the thing. I don't think the children on the card in this sense are necessarily have anything to do with that. And it might be something interpretive that the artist and Crowley of this deck have put in that there's a relationship.
Maybe.
They're all interrelated, right? They're all working off with the same set of mystical sort of leaning and the body of Hermetic knowledge. So many things that come up even here, even if it's not intentionally related, will have very similar. Like after all of his creative, like going to crazy places and to build up his tower, I find many of his realizations completely in line with a lot of other traditions, right? Because they're tied together by a shared history through Hermeticism of this sort of kind of mystical experience. And we as humans are more similar than different in this way, that we often reach, and at the end we kind of find that we're all kind of sort of talking about the same thing, even if when we have no discourse. Yeah, so the 19th arcanum of the tarot, the arcanum of intuition, is that of revelatory naivety in the act of knowledge, which render the spirit capable of an intensity of look not troubled by doubt, and by the scruples engendered by doubt. And I think he's finally getting to it, right? He's trying to.
That's where I think he's going with the fool.
Yeah. It is the vision of things such as they are, under the eternal, internally new day of the sun. It teaches the art of undergoing pure and simple impression, which reveals through itself, without intellectual hypothesis and superstructures, what things are. Yeah, then he's talking about numinous in relation to Kantian sort of thought, which is a thing in of itself that might or might not have any kind of expression, right? Or phenomenon that you can detect. Talking about higher order things.
That reminds me of what like Buddhists talk about when you get into that state.
Yeah.
Right, where you're just plainly.
Yeah, it's just
in,
it's in. You're in, right?
Like, yeah.
Words fail. There's no concepts or description, right?
Yeah.
It is the thing behind the phenomenon. Right? If there's a thing at all, and if it's a thing, and the disagreement is whether that thing is thing or nothing. I think that is the fundamental disagreement between Buddhism and its predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
And or nothing.
Buddhism, nothing. It's not nothing. It's emptiness.
Yeah,
which
it's
is different than
emptiness.
nothing.
Yeah, emptiness, not divine. Right.
Yeah.
The emptiness in which we are all like, it's emptiness, right? Not like some kind of divine hierarchy, or not some kind of divine power or some kind of superstructure or something like that. That is this fundamental disagreement. Yeah. Let me see if there is practice of. Then he talks about the practices within. He's really reinforcing the virtues of some of the Catholic practices, rosary, and also this thing that you say, which is one father and three mothers, right? Pointing at a fundamental, deeper truth, the union principles there that basically this entire chapter is about. So this chapter is incredible in the sense that it wraps up so much of the traditions, and I think it's actually pretty amazing that he managed to kind of do it through sheer operation of will and years of I'm sure years of thinking about this stuff, right, in his room, in his study, right. Yeah, amazing for what it is, right? For its own sake, it is pretty amazing, regardless of what you think about his conclusions or how he got to it. It's wonderful to watch someone to really set down their life's work, the combination of their life's purpose, their hopes and dreams, their goals, their instincts, their faith, their practice, all fused up into the page, so much so that you can feel a sense of uplift just from reading, right? Like you yourself feel like the words themselves can uplift you. That's pretty amazing. I think Britannia, you said that it set you on fire, right? And you just stayed up and read the whole thing.
Yeah, it was a visceral feeling as much as it was kind of like that feeling I felt when I was meditating the other day, and it was more of like I went into that void where it's not a void at all. It's full of everything, and you can download as much as. It's kind of like when you're a little kid and there's that little elephant that you put the butterflies in, and then it blows the butterflies in the air and you try to catch it with a net. But you're like in like this space, and your mind and like your intuition is like the net, and you're trying to like catch the knowledge and like the wisdom, and it's like downloading and stuff. And so it's more of like a authentic embrace instead of like I'm gonna figure this out if I stay up all night studying and smash my face against a book trying to understand something. It's like it's like having a light bulb turn on, but then it like emanates through all of you because your whole body just feels more like harmonious with the idea of the universe, and it's co-being in like the ways that, I don't know, it's like a deeper understanding in a sense that you don't have to explain it because it just is. And it's, I don't know, it's very peaceful. And and it also like just, yeah, totally lit a fire under me. Made me want to read more like of I feel like I tend to start books like this in non-fiction because I have really good groups to hold me accountable. So I feel like now like having everyone to talk with about it is like part of you guys that like light me on fire talking about this. Like I was looking forward to today.
That's
So
nice.
I don't know. I just
Yeah,
like love that
it's
feeling of like
wonderful.
sharing in this with you guys too. I mean, going it alone is like, I mean, we all are reading it alone, but like having our interpretations together has been like more fulfilling than anything.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, this chapter, I felt like I was banging my head against this
I
chapter
did
a
too.
lot, but now this good discussion has given me that feeling of like, yes, now I understand it. Like now I get it. I think like sometimes things come piecemeal to me, and I don't quite like. I have a hard time referencing back to what he said before. I just that's the way my brain works sometimes. So his like, he's not like a clear writer for me because he feels like he's digressing all the time, so I'm like always trying to remember what he said before, so I have a hard time sometimes with his writing, but
He
sometimes
has
I feel like I get
secular
the flow of
logic.
it really well. But this chapter was hard for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, there's so much in here, and he does take detours, right? He detours and then he'll come back, and then somewhere halfway, my feeling is, kind of semi-related, right? But that's from my perspective. But there's just so much material that sometimes you'll just, from sheer amount of stuff that he's throwing at you in terms of words, right? You'll forget what he's talking about. But this is not easy reading material, right? Once again, without a lot of the sort of preparatory or sheer understanding that we have with him, this book would be incomprehensible. I mean, I'm convinced of this. You will not be able to make it out of the first 2 or 3 chapters without just totally like losing interest in it, because you have no idea what's being said. This is not easy material by any means. Certainly not for anyone who's not spent a lot of time thinking about, or if they haven't already, just in their lifetime thought a lot about Christian philosophy or hermetics, or some of these things he's talking about, like this hexagram, right? Like some guy just picked up this book, they're like, what? what is this? Like what are you talking about, right? So it's
well, yeah,
great to
even like he even admits, I was just seeing, he admits that the hexagram isn't accepted by the church, but he's like, oh, it will be one day, which is he's like going out on a limb and like challenging the Catholic dogma, which is like,
Well, because at this time, though, the Catholics didn't recognize Mary like he was recognizing it, I think, officially. But I think that changed in the 90s, where they
did it?
I mean, that's when I just went to Catholic church, and I was like, why is Mary everywhere? Like it was all of LA, the big thing. It was the whole background.
She's always like that, though.
Yeah, Mary was always
and it's
there.
always like that. Was it always there though?
Yeah,
Well,
Yeah, Mary's the
well,
jam.
I think it depends where you are. Like in like Spain and
that's
like
why
Spanish
changed it.
cultures, there's tons of Mary. Like Mary is everywhere.
Yeah, Mexico,
But
there's like every church is like, it's like,
yeah.
But I think in like
I like the
France
feminine
and
energy of it, though.
German Catholics, not so much.
But they changed it
That's
in
my
that, like she
thinking.
said, they officially changed it where they recognize it more like the Latins have always done, because the cultures that had mother, ceremonies now fit into Catholic kind of thing better than when they denied her or whatnot,
Yeah, when I went to the Vatican and stuff, honestly, it was not Mother Mary everywhere. It was like Jesus and God, and very masculine in Italy, especially like in the Vatican City and in all the churches around there. But when I go to Mexico, Costa Rica, or, like even in Spain and stuff, it was a lot more like emphasis on at least a balance between the two. And I felt like for me, I know it sounds weird because I grew up with like my family like deep south from Texas Catholic. So that's a very, very specific type of Catholic where it's like Mother Mary is very serious, but it's very Trinity heavy. And the Trinity is aiming at like the Father, you know, like in the sense of like the hierarchy or like the who you're praying to and like what you're focusing on when you're like accessing like the energy of that. But I felt like I see like how a lot of people can see that there's like a lot of machismo in certain cultures, but then like the femininity and the strength of the femininity comes out in like that family, that maternal, that like Mary position in culture and in spirituality. And I think there's like that underlying strength that like happens in a lot of cultures where it seemingly from the outside can be one way, and it very well is in certain ways. But I think that there's like this depth of like respect and like this reservoir of untapped like acknowledgement that I think is becoming more true, like you said, in the 90s being more like officially recognized, which I think is cool. Because I mean, like, and I know maybe this may be like a little silly, but a lot of my friends growing up, the ones that I wanted to go to church with and would agree to go to services, it was always their mom wanting us to go to church. Their dad was never hounding us to go to Catholic mass for some reason. It just seemed like it was very much like the mom is telling us that she wants us to go to church, and like I'm down to go. So I mean, it was an interesting flip for me because in my family, like I always was like grandpa's in charge, you know, but it was really grandma trying to get everyone to go to church. It was grandma like shooing all the grandkids into the car to go to church.
Cute.
You know, and grandpa believed in it a lot, but I felt like it was kind of indicative of like this underlying maternal strength
For
that
sure.
I began to see more and more like the older I got with the exposure to like different services, different places, because you see the difference.
For sure. I mean, wrapping this up, right? I think overall I was kind of banging my head on this chapter. I felt like there was so much that was so deep, but in a way where I did get it, the concepts. But after the conversation, I just kind of realized I think I kind of disagree with a lot in terms of how I practice, which is really interesting because I haven't felt that way on any other chapter as hard as this one, I think, for some reason. But also this chapter, I mean, I really, when I was reading it, it does feel like it's very much so corresponding to my life in the way that, like, you know, I'm feeling the sun card right now. But I think in my overall practice, I'm having so many little, like, I think the big picture hangups are kind of there, but I really appreciate the like glimpses into how to tweak things a little bit to get things on a different, just like a more refined path of what I'm already on. So find a lot of value in it. But yeah.
Well, he's demonstrating it in real time, right? How to get creative and how to really try to take a, you know, through creativity, through working with it, right? How to massage it into a form that's more, that's essentially more in alignment with how you do your thing. You know, take from it what is valuable, right? What is valuable for you, and make use of it, right? He's kind of showing you in writing form how to creatively fuse the, you know, all these disparate elements, so to speak, to form something that is really a pretty unique synthesis. Pretty beautiful thing, really. It's a beautiful thing. It has a merit on its own for what it is, and it's really just you know, I have very little share history or crossover with this particular stream of thought, right? Christianity is not my background, or never really got to church or thought about any of this stuff. But I find a lot of I find reading this book to be extremely valuable, from just deepening my understanding of spirituality and religion, certainly of the Western tradition, as it encapsulates so much of it, and in a way that I'm seeing that the way that the tradition has been constructed and argued over and discussed, and for me, that is a wonderful way to understand and study the Western tradition, right? To honor it, to meet it where it is at, not to try to not to try to make it conform to something that, it's more like, hey, this is what I share with something else, but to really see it for what it is in exactly the way that it's being worked in its living form, so to speak.
Agreed. 1000%.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's hard for us who aren't baptized. I'm not baptized. I don't know if you guys are, but I'm not
I'm
baptized.
baptized.
Well, you're baptized at least, geez. But yeah, we don't the not having connection, going to Catholic Church all the time and getting the rituals. That's so it's hard to like, yeah, understand.
Yeah,
Not so much. And I mean, he says that that's all you need. Like he's like saying all the Catholics are fine going to church, but like he's so called to this like hermetic path that he has to expand, like go deeper, because that's
Yeah.
like that's his path to each his powers. He quotes that in this chapter. But and yeah, it's real. I think it's valuable to have dialogue with it in this way, and the historical dialogue too, because we're all still part of a Western culture that is heavily influenced by this. So it's important to like get the. I think it's real. I think it's really cool. Not necessarily important, but it's really cool to get this context and have dialogue with these ideas.
Yeah.
And to have dialogues with people who are much more in alignment with this way of thinking, right? And definitely you will have a much more expanded, a deeper appreciation of one of their perspective, and number two, the ability to then take this very well considered, very informed perspective, right? And when you're in discussion with them about a particular thing, you will have a deeper level of understanding of what they're saying, right? Or a deeper appreciation of how things are different with them. Now that you have had a deep exposure to something that is so scholastic, right? So well considered, so expanded, right? It's like giving you like a shot of like Christian thought, hermetic thought, all combined all in one, and now all of a sudden you're like you can have deep discussion with someone who has done some some non-trivial thinking around this topic. For example, somebody who is a deeply religious Christian. Yeah. I'm pretty sure what you will have to say based on what is written or what we have read here will blow some people's minds about things about their own religion.
Yeah, I was okay. That was something that made me super jazzed last night, because I had this friend who'd been having a rough time, and she had this like total like moment of like connecting and like having like this spiritual breakthrough, and she came to my house and like told me about it. And everything that she was talking about kind of lined up with like certain parts of this chapter, but she's very Christian. And so for her, I felt like this chapter was like super profound, and I like highlighted and like dog-eared some pages that I wanted to share with her. And I was so excited to like be able to connect so deeply with somebody.
Ooh. Screaming.
Sorry, that was my mom.
It's okay. Oh no. Oh man.
I meant to ask, you guys are okay, right? There's the flooding didn't get you, right?
No, I'm a lot more south than LA. So
Okay.
yeah, I know. I had so many people text me, be like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah." I mean, it was like sprinkling where I was, but it was like full downpour anywhere north of me, I guess.
Yeah.
Should I share a quote and then wrap it up?
Let's do.
Okay. Cool. So this is page 544. It's kind of random, but I really like it. It is the will, which is the essence of things, and that things are only representations of the will. Therefore, the world is, according to Schopenhauer, a unique will which represents or imagines the multiplicity of things.
Oh, Schopenhauer.
I don't know if we agree with that, but I really like it. That's one part that I really resonated with. And I feel like that's a lead in to next chapters as well. Hopefully he expands on the will a little bit more in terms of what that means of the essence of things. You know, I think that's maybe what can be found behind intuition, but stay tuned. We'll meet in 2 weeks to talk about judgment. I'm going to end the recording, but we can still, I have some things to catch up with you all about. So